The day I heard my little brother had died, I was working at a law firm in Montana. It was a super rainy day, and the place where we worked was up in the mountains. It was this beautiful cabin. It was a really cool place to get to go to work every day, but it was a little bit disconnected technologically, and that was, I think, by design. And so my wife was the person who my family could get a hold of after the accident that killed my brother and his three friends. And so it fell to her to drive up and tell me what had happened, tell me about a thing that would be the watershed moment for the entire history of my family. So I remember this. I was sitting downstairs, chipping away really hard at work. It was a productive day. And Camilla rolled up in our car, and I was like, well, there's no way she has time during her workday to come all the way out here. I hope she's all right. I hope she didn't get fired. All these things crossed my mind. And she gets out of the vehicle and she comes to the door, and I can tell that it's not rain on her face, that she's dealing with something. And so I went to ask, and she was like, we should sit out here and talk. So I walked through the rain, and I sat in the car, and I sat down and just very succinctly said, his brother's been in an accident. And I remember thinking, well, we should hustle down to go see family. This was in Montana, and my family lived in Colorado. We should get down there, and, if it's serious enough for you to come tell me, he's probably pretty banged up. And while I was running that calculation in my brain, she's like, and he did not survive. And I don't remember exactly how she phrased it. But unlike any other moment before or since, it felt like somebody just decked me in the stomach. Is the only time that I've ever felt the wind knocked out of me in a physical response without something physical actually having happened. It was just too dang much to compute. And so I still said the thought that was already percolating in my brain, which was, well, we should go down there. But my voice wobbled at the end of it, and I think I was just sort of in shock. I loved the kid. He was 4 years younger than me. I was very much the big brother. He was very much the little brother. And we gave each other crap, and I beat on him and stuff when we were younger, but he turned out to be tough as nails and liked dishing that back my way. And like any big brother, little brother thing, my approval was important to him. Whatever I'm good at and bad at was going to factor into his strengths and weaknesses and insecurities. And so we were just very uniquely connected by merit of the fact that we loved each other, and by merit of the fact that we're blood and that we were raised in a good household together by good parents and with a good sister in between us. And it was such a bizarre moment because it escalated in implications with each cycle of thought that I reapplied to it in the moment. And so I got out of the car, and I was cold and stuff. And the attorney I worked with, who was, a good friend. I mean, that was my law school internship, and he took a chance on letting me help with his law firm before I'd accomplished anything. And so, I mean, he's a good dude. And he offered me a sweater because he could tell I was shaking. And that was kind of it. I never went back to work. I saw that guy more, but never went back to work. My wife never went back to work. We went down, we did the funeral, we moved to Colorado to be closer to family, and the whole trajectory of my life changed, because then after that, my dad was having trouble as a pastor. I mean, as you would guess, his youngest son died tragically and suddenly. Dad didn't do so well at work after that, and just had trouble being creative and funny and being the person who he was. He had trouble leading the church. And so, I'd gone to school for some of that, just, for the novelty of it, because I found the subject matter interesting, not with any career ambitions. So then I jumped in and helped Dad with church stuff until he was on his feet and functional again. And then I just went deeper and deeper into that world and never went back to law school and never ended up doing more in that vein. So it was a very pivotal moment in terms of how my family turned out and how my life turned out. But I think I was saying this a second ago and I got distracted. The implications of the news that Camilla, my wife, brought me just kept expanding the more I thought about it. There's that initial moment when somebody you care about dies where you have it occur to you that you're never going to talk to them, but you just talked to them. So it doesn't feel that weird because it's still fresh, like any other thriving recent relationship. It's only as a day goes by, a week goes by, a month goes by, a year goes by, you kind of start to forget what they sounded like goes by, that the weight of that really sinks in. But rationally, I was starting to process that pretty early in the game. But I think the first thing I grieved after just the loss of a person I loved very, very much was the death of the moment, the death of the paradigm, the death of my childhood family being the way my childhood family was, the end of the innocence, the end of my youthful sense of invincibility, and the death of a relational dynamic with a younger brother that I could never replace. We had a thing, a shtick, a way we came at life together, a way that we could solve problems together, a way that we could make problems for each other, is an irreplaceable dynamic. And it occurred to me pretty quickly I was never getting that back. And of course I haven't. You can't replace a brother. And so that's that. And now I just miss him a ton. I think I've allowed this conversation to sound way more emotional than I mean it to. I mean, this has been a long time, and I'm good with it. I love my brother. That's awesome. I have certain aspects of my faith that cause me to feel pretty confident about what my brother's ultimate fate was spiritually and eternally, and I'm very much at peace with those things. But I guess I bring it up to say that when I took my first pass through the Bible when I was a kid, I read the whole thing. I wrote down the date of each reading that I did. So I would have a Bible for my whole life that had the date that I first encountered each and every bit of these words, each and every one of these passages on my first trip through. And when I did that as a kid and wrote down all the dates in the Bible as I did so, there were certain things I could relate to and that stood out to me and appealed to me. The violence of David and Goliath, the kid-like bright images of Noah's Ark that I pictured from children's books I'd read. It hadn't occurred to me that there'd be like dead bodies everywhere and how horrifying that story actually is. But the stuff that I didn't relate to well was loss. I didn't have any kind of comprehension of death or loss or what that would mean. And I certainly did not think in any way about the humanity of Jesus being displayed in how he responded to loss. And so a passage like the one I'm taking forever to get us to today in Matthew 14, where we do see Jesus respond to loss, didn't hit me as hard on that first trip through as it has on my successive trips through. And the crazy thing is, every time I go through the Bible, every time I go through the book of Matthew or the book of John and see what it looks like when Jesus responds to loss, even though he has seen the other side, he is the philosopher king. He has been outside of the cave. He knows what is actually reality. He knows what actual life beyond the natural order of things looks like, and yet he expresses grief. And yet we see a moment right here in Matthew 14 that hits him like a ton of bricks, the same way that news that I got sitting in that Oldsmobile with my wife on October 14th, 1998, hit me like a ton of bricks. So we've got this horrible murder of John the Baptist. I don't care if it somehow fits inside the boundaries of what is quote unquote legal. It's state-sanctioned murder and in every way a violation of the natural order, and what happened here was wrong and a crime, even if there was some fancy paperwork to make it legal. This was really profoundly morally screwed up and tragic, and by this I mean Herod Antipas's execution of John the Baptist in a grisly way at the behest of his niece/sister-in-law/wife, at the behest of her daughter, who had just performed what looks like a seductive dance for a party full of drunken sycophants who were trying to please an insecure king who wielded entirely too much power, as evidenced by this event. So this is a mess. This is a moral mess, but it's also a profound emotional tragedy for the people who lost a son, a nephew, a cousin. I mean, how would this have struck the ears of Mary, mother of Jesus? Remember the history she had with this kid, John the Baptist? How would this have struck Zechariah and Elizabeth, John's parents, if indeed they were still alive? They were much older at the time of his birth, so I don't know, maybe they had already passed on. How would this have struck Jesus' family, who we encounter at the end of chapter 12, coming to collect him out of concern that he's doing the wrong things? Would they hear about what happened to John the Baptist and be like, that is why we wanted you to come with us, Jesus? We love you, and you're playing with fire. You have to stop. Look at what happened to John. Well, we get a sense of how it struck John's disciples. They came and took John the Baptist's body and they buried it, and then they went and told Jesus about it. We know from both inside and outside of the Bible that this incident did not dissuade John the Baptist's disciples. If anything, they doubled and tripled and quadrupled down on believing in what he had taught. I mean, his core message was, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is near. And that water baptism was their trademark, at least up through the rest of the New Testament. When Paul encounters Apollos, Aquila and Priscilla encounter Apollos, and they all eventually get to know each other. What Aquila and Priscilla find in the book of Acts is that this great Christian early leader from North Africa is only aware of the baptism of John. So John the Baptist's disciples come out of this incident and they're like, not only are we not done, we're going global with this thing right now. They bury John's body. The body is in the ground. The dirt is still settling, and they're off telling other people the same message that John told to them. Now, it doesn't seem like those disciples are crystal clear on how all of this fits with Jesus, but, well, the emotional effect that it has on them is that they can't help but get after it. But then they go and tell Jesus, and this is what we hear. Verse 13. When Jesus heard what had happened, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. Hearing of this, the crowds followed him on foot from the towns. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed their sick. And I want to take more time than we've got left today to unpack that social dynamic. Jesus' grief, people not really respecting it, and Jesus' response to being crowded and followed and paparazzi'd when he's trying to do something very human, which is be sad about losing someone dear to him on multiple levels. That merits a longer conversation. I'm just going to push the stop button here in a second and push start again. And so for me, I'll be picking up in this exact same frame of mind tomorrow. As you and I discussed yesterday, the execution of John the Baptist is going to prove to be a watershed moment for a ton of people, a watershed moment politically and religiously. But also, I have to think that with the time that Jesus had left remaining in his human earthly life, that it was an emotional, relational watershed moment for him. In the same way, you might talk about losing someone and be like, well, before the accident or after the accident, or, well, before the stroke or after the stroke, or whatever that watershed moment is. It looks like that's one of those for Jesus right here. And I'm guessing he divided time into a while John the Baptist was still around era and after John the Baptist was gone era. And we'll pick it up on that note tomorrow. Thank you by merit of your being here, and more specifically for many of you by merit of your actual communication with me, for making it not feel weird to talk about something like this with you. It's meaningful to me that I sense the degree of trust and collegiality that allows for exploring some of these topics in ways that draw on very personal experiences for me, and that probably conjure very personal experiences for you. I'm not the only person who ever lost somebody. I understand that getting into this kind of stuff takes you back to those watershed moments in your life as well. And I appreciate that even though this is a weird medium for us to share those experiences, that in a way we are, and that we can, for the larger purpose of thinking through the big questions that come with this, and just the big questions and moments about life and death and existence that we all have in common one way or another. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.